In the Pennies, Dollars, and Change project, you were asked to create an application in C# in which a jar of pennies can be converted to the maximum number of dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. So of course 1,367 pennies should be $13.67, and that can be comprised of $13 bills. Out of that 67 cents that's remaining, we can get 2 quarters. Out of the 17 cents remaining, we can get a dime, a nickel, and 2 pennies. So we want to maximize each one of these values as much as possible. I always have students ask, well, when would you use modulus? I don't see any value for that. This is a great project to demonstrate the use of modulus in finding the remainder of an integer division, as well as integer division. So that was the tip I gave here. I recommend using division and modulus operations. And then we have some values that we can use for testing. So let me show you my solution to this project in case you're struggling with it and need a little extra help, or you just want to see how I did it, which might be a little different from the way you did it. Here in Visual Studio, I'm looking at my Form 1CS as far as the design, and let's take a look at some of the properties here. So I've got my form. I set the text to pennies to dollars and change. My form is 579 by 300. Your size might vary a little bit different from mine. That's okay. I created a label with text of number of pennies and then a text box that I named txt number. I have a button named btn convert and a button named btn exit. And then here I created a panel. And the panel just lets me kind of group things together and gives a nice little different colored background to this area. So within the panel, I have a bunch of text boxes as well as some labels. By the way, I can grab this panel and notice I can move it around, and the stuff inside the panel moves with it. So inside the panel, I have a text box named txt dollars, and then a label that says dollars. I named it LBL dollars, though you don't really need to name it because we're not going to change these in code. Stuff you can refer to in code, those should be named differently than the default, such as text box 1 and text box 2, making them a little more meaningful. So this text box is txt quarters, txt dimes, txt nickels, and txt pennies. And then I have another label over here which has my directions, and I named it LBL directions. But again, we're not going to refer to this in code, so I didn't really need to name it. Each of these text boxes have the alignment, the text align set to right, as does this one up here. So for numbers, for numeric values, I like to have my values aligned to the right in a text box. Now all of our code exists in the btn convert and btn exit. Let's just take a look at the exit first. I'm going to double click on that. Let me get my properties panel out of the way. And so the btn exit underscore click event handler, the code in there is simply this.close. This refers to my current form, and if I close the current form, since it's the only form that's open, my application will end. Very simple to create an exit button. Now we'll see next week how we can use an if structure and a message box and determine which button the user clicks. So we could ask them in a message box, do you really want to exit? And if they click on the yes button, then we close, and if not, we wouldn't close. But for now, we're just going to, if they click the exit button, we'll close the application. Okay, I'm going to scroll up. This is my btn convert. It's the only thing I've really added in here. So of course we can also get there by just double clicking btn convert on our form. So here I have some integer variables named num, dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. Now the question has arisen, when would you use an integer and when do you use a double value, or maybe even a float value or a decimal value? Think of what you're portraying here. So we're portraying pennies, quarters, dimes, nickels, and dollar bills. We wouldn't have a half a quarter or a third of a dime or 2/3 of a penny. These are all whole values, so we can use integers. So I set all those as integer values. Notice I can do multiple variables at once, just comma separating. They're all event type. And then in the num variable, we're going to get the text of txt number, text property, and we're going to convert that to an integer using int.parse. Now I want to find how many dollars I can get out of that jar of pennies. So I'm going to take dollars and divide num by 100. Now because num is an integer and 100 is an integer, it's going to give me an integer value. If I said 100.0, I would get a decimal value. Now it's giving me a squiggly here because it's saying, hey, dollars is an integer. I can't assign a double value to dollars. But that's how we'd get a standard division, is one of the two numbers has to be a double or a float or a decimal. If they're both integers, we get an integer division in C#. So if I have 1,275 pennies, I'm now going to have $12. 1,275 divided by 100 as an integer division is going to give me 12. Now I want to take those pennies away, because we've already converted those 1,200 pennies into dollars. How can I do that? Well, I can take the value of num, that was my 1,275, and do a modulus operation of 100. What's the remainder? That's going to be 75. So now I've changed the value of num. I want to find how many quarters there are in num. I'm going to divide that by 25. Again, integer division, because num is an integer. So is 25. Now if I had 1,367 pennies, and we took $13, and then we took 2 quarters out of those 67 pennies, that'd be 50 cents, that's going to leave me 17 pennies left. So I'm going to find that by taking my num value, that's the 67, if there's 1,367 pennies, and doing a modulus operation of 25. What's the remainder? Well, we can get 25 twice in that 67, and now we're going to be left with 17 cents, 17 pennies. Okay, let's move on. How many dimes can we get out of that? Let's divide by 10. We want to find how many pennies are left over. We can do modulus of 10. You start to see a pattern here. Integer division, modulus, integer division, modulus, integer division, modulus. Now you take the nickels, or to find the nickels, I need to take num and do an integer division by 5. I should never have more than 1 nickel, because if I had 2 nickels, it should be a dime. I should never have more than 2 dimes, because if I had 3 dimes, I should have gotten a quarter. And I should never have more than 3 quarters, because if I had 4 quarters, I should have gotten $1. So we find how many nickels we get. Now we need to find how many pennies are left over. We're going to do a modulus operation by 5. And that's how many pennies we have. I'm going to assign num to pennies. I could have said pennies equals num percent 5 or modulus 5. That I wouldn't necessarily need this statement. But it's nicely read here in terms of I always have num equals something after each operation. Okay, that's going to find the number of dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. We now need to output. So thinking back in terms of input, process, output. Here was our input. Here is our process. And now here is our output. txt dollars.text equals dollars. Now that's an integer value. Text is a string value. I need to convert dollars to string. I just do .toString. Do the same thing for txt quarters.text. Assign it the value of quarters.toString, dimes, dimes.toString, txt nickels, nickels.toString, and txt pennies, pennies.toString. Let's see if this all works. I'm going to start my program. So let's put in 1,289 pennies. I'm going to convert. I get $12, 3 quarters, so that's $12.75. That leaves me 14 cents left, 14 pennies. I get a dime and 4 pennies. What if we have 567 pennies? $5, 2 quarters, a dime, a nickel, and 2 pennies. 1,400 pennies. $14, there's no change left. And if I simply do 99, I get $0, but I get 3 quarters, 2 dimes, no nickels, and 4 pennies. Click the exit button. Closes our form, which closes the application. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the C# Xamarin Programming Cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.